and to defend biodiversity. And one of the most important things, Nick, that is a priority to us is to defeat deforestation. We're setting the goal to have zero deforestation by 2030 or sooner. But the important thing is this year we have made a reduction of 30%.
Can you really implement zero deforestation by 2030?
It is a must, and we will.
Yeah, but how do you do that?
So we are using three policies. The one most important is to have natural conservation contracts. So we have peasants and indigenous communities protecting the land. But that has to be aligned with the issue of having 30% of Colombian soil declared a protected area. So what we can do is, with the areas that are protected, the protection, bring it to the green financing and the carbon emissions contractual methodologies that are around the world.
But what about the areas you don't control? I mean, you've just picked up one of the big drug dealers. You also have still the problem of the FARC, the guerrillas. How much do you really control the areas you're going to deforest?
That's a great question, because we launched the Artemis campaign with the Colombian military and the Colombian police. It's the first time that we have put the fight against deforestation as one of the most important elements in our national security
policy. Is it
policy.
as important as fighting guerrillas and drugs dealers?
It's at the same importance, and let me show you why. Because all the businesses are connected. For every hectare of coca, 2 hectares of tropical jungle are destroyed in Colombia. So fighting deforestation is also one of the most important priorities to protect Colombia and its strategic land. And something that I want to raise, Nick, when we have gone to the territories that have been under the influence of armed groups and we bring the national conservation contracts, the peasants prefer to go this way than to be pressured on illegal businesses.
How then do you invest in deforestation? That's going to be a key initiative from this meeting of COP. How do you invest in it, maintain control and make sure the money doesn't go to the wrong people?
We did something 2 years ago in Davos. We joined the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative, and we made the commitment to plant 180 million trees in Colombia, where by the end of this year we'll have 120 million already planted, and we will accomplish the 100.
You're sure about that?
Yes, absolutely sure. And we have a monitoring system where we know day by day how are we running on the target. But the other thing that you mentioned is, how do we make this viable? That's where green financing comes in place. If we declare protected areas and we get the protection to be part of the carbon market, and companies and governments that want to neutralize their CO2 emissions can buy those credits derived of those objectives, Colombia will be able to mobilize massive amount of resources to protect this land.
You come from business before you became president. What do you believe is the real feeling of business people, the corporate leaders, about the potential for a green revolution, a green economic revolution in Colombia?
Well, one of the things that we have promoted in Colombia is the concept of the B Corps, which are benefit corporations. They do well, but they do good. So we want
Has
to
that been accepted by a significant number of the corporates?
Well, and actually we have today 1,000 companies that are already registered as B Corps in Colombia, but we already have 105 companies that have committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. So I believe the private sector has realized that they also have to build trust with their consumers, and the best way to build that trust is also to show their commitment to achieve these goals.
But one of the key issues here in Glasgow has been the fact that nature has not been costed. Look at the, dare I say, the rape of Colombia, many parts of Colombia. That's what stopping deforestation is about. Do you reckon that your business leaders will understand that nature has to be seen as a financial cost, not something they can just exploit?
Well, I think the most important thing, Nick, is that we come here to Glasgow because there's no planet B, and we have to respond with an agreement. And Colombia only represents 0.6% of the world greenhouse gases emissions, but it's one of the top 20 most threatened countries by climate change. And if a country like Colombia, with just 0.6% of the emissions, is making such bold commitments, we want the biggest, more richer countries around the world, but also the corporate system, to engage in looking at this climate action ambition as priority number one.
But let me re-emphasize my question. The fact is that nature has not been costed as a cost to business. Now it needs to. That's what the Dasgupta report was about earlier this year. The emeritus professor of economics at Cambridge University saying business doesn't understand that nature carries a cost now.
You want me to tell you a story about your question and what are we doing in Colombia? We're changing the concept of competitiveness, not only looking at price or productivity, but also how green is to invest a dollar in Colombia vis-a-vis other parts in the world.
With metrics to back that.
With metrics, and we have done this with the private sector in Colombia. So we have demonstrated that a dollar invested in Colombia with a cleaner energy matrix, with more protection of the areas, and also connecting the population to reduce the individual carbon footprint, makes a better case for our nation, and it makes a better reference for other countries in Latin America.
Now, one of your policies has been biodiversity, with the city spelled CITY. What progress do you reckon you've made on that?
We have 11 cities in Colombia that have committed to this strategy. Because at the
What
end,
does it mean?
So we want cities to be good in the way they have their energy matrix, to be better in waste management, reduce, reuse, recycle, the private sector to engage in conserve, protecting when they produce. And we also want something that is very important, clean mobility, reduce individual carbon footprint, and have a big commitment of citizens to plant trees over certain periods of time.
Do you reckon you've really begun to change the mindset, though? Because that's something which is bedeviling every political leader here. You know the scientific problem, but you've got to convince the people they've got to change.
At the end, Nick, we're in the great debate of the 21st century. Climate crisis is the most important issue of our time, and we need to act all together. And that's why I celebrate that in Colombia, the national government, the local governments, private sector, foundations, academia, we're all joining our strategy to become a carbon neutral country by 2050. And I think that is a very important mindset change.
Final thought, if I may. In the end, your presidency has been a problematic presidency because you've been bedeviled by so many other social issues. I don't have to list them here. Do you regret in some ways that you weren't able to make more of sustainability?
Well, I'll tell you this. I am very happy that dealing also with the pandemic for almost 2 years, we made the most important social reforms in Colombia.
But you had a big protest on the streets as well.
Yes, we did, as the world has seen it not only in Colombia but elsewhere. But the important thing, Nick, is that we have been able also to respond to the people. In what way? We have made the biggest social investment ever by a government in Colombia's history, and we have achieved free public university education for the middle class, the emerging middle class, and the poorest of the poor. We've reached the biggest sales ever in low-income housing in our nation. And more importantly, we have made all these reforms so that Colombia becomes a leader in environmental policies around the world.
And how does that affect sustainability? How people live at home, what they buy, what they eat? You're a big meat-eating nation.
Well, I think we're trying to create this concept of being able to, each one of us know, how can we reduce our individual carbon footprint? And that means, how do we mobilize? How do we eat? How do we consume electricity? How do we consume water? How do we recycle? Because at the end, this is not just the government, it's all of us. So being able to have a clear set of information that citizens can look at, that can work with applications to know how big their individual carbon footprint is and how to reduce it, is something that is also going to engage Colombia in the next years.
That's a huge challenge, President Duque. Thank you very much indeed, Nick, for sparing time.
I appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
All the best. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's pick up on those critical issues of the scale and the nature of nature now, particularly in the overwhelming matrix of what is now being examined here in Glasgow. I'm joined by Harvey Locke, conservationist, to talk about this. And the framing in many ways, Harvey, is the Dasgupta report of last February, which said very clearly, nature is not factored into economic judgments. What's your assessment?
Well, the importance of the Dasgupta report is it made it clear that we live on Earth and that nature is not an externality. It's in fact the context for everything we do. And we have to shift our thinking in that way. And one of the important things I heard him say when he was speaking to his report was, sometimes we have to do a little bit less, not do more. We need to sort of back off and give the Earth room to function. And this is where the engagement of nature and the climate is so important. We can't solve the climate crisis without protecting nature. And we can't solve the biodiversity extinction crisis without addressing the rapidly changing climate. So we have two sides of the same coin, and this COP is exciting because one of its 3 goals is to talk about ecosystems and biodiversity and how that's part of the picture relating to the climate crisis that we now face.
But that was 8 months ago. Do you think there has been a significant change? I would suggest to you, from my analysis and observations, that there's been remarkable engagement on the fact that up to now, nature has only been an externality, that now it's got to be at the heart of all cost.
I think it's very exciting, like right down to the agenda of this COP. Nature's on the agenda, one of 4 points.
It wouldn't have been a year ago.
Oh, certainly not. In fact, I'm a nature expert, if you will, and I've not been in that capacity at one of these COPs before. I tend to be going to the biodiversity COPs. So what we saw in the G7, there was an important moment in the G7 when they'd issued a 2030 Leaders Nature Compact that said the world must not only be net zero, it must also become nature positive. And those leaders all pledged to focus on bringing these two things together this year. And this brings out ideas like protecting at least 30% of the world by 2030, halting and reversing nature loss by 2030, stopping extinctions. We also need to think about supply chains and sustainable production methods. But now we're thinking about the whole picture. And really, it's a return to basics. In 1992, when the Rio Conventions were signed, which is what this climate convention is, we call it the Paris Agreement, but it's a Rio Convention. When the Biodiversity Convention was signed and the Desertification Convention were all signed, we knew we had an integrated problem. It was called the Rio Earth Summit. Now here we are finally back in Glasgow talking about the integrated problem of the Earth. So in a sense, we're having a Glasgow Earth Summit with the climate being such a paramount issue in everyone's mind. But, you know, none of the climate models work if we don't get the nature part right.
In 15 seconds, if you can, Harvey, do you believe there has been an incredible forward movement in the last few months, which means that even if there isn't technically an agreement here, there's substantive stuff which has essentially been agreed, which should give us grounds for optimism, even if not on speed?
If you do global environmental policy, you must get up in the morning an optimist and go to bed an optimist. I'm optimistic to see this energy, to see the nature and climate conversation is so deeply integrated now. I think the UK is doing an important thing with its leadership on this, and I think we can have an equitable, nature-positive and carbon-neutral world if we just keep trying.
Let's talk not about optimism, but maybe realism when you get up in the morning and realism when you go to bed. Harvey, thank you very much indeed. Harvey Locke there. Thanks for joining us here in our special studio at COP26. Now, let me just give you a little idea of where we are in this enormous area of COP26, down in the former shipbuilding area of Glasgow, alongside the banks of the Clyde. You wouldn't think it here. This is the big centre for exhibitions, which has been turned into a monster kind of gathering place. With these kind of rooms, that happens to be our room. I have to say, since we took these pictures about in the last couple of hours, since the leaders have been speaking, these spaces have filled up dramatically. And now there's something of a traffic jam around many of the corridors. So the idea that you can find a quiet place somewhere in this area, this conference area, forget it, because actually you can queue for up to 2 hours to get through security, have your bags checked, and there are somewhere around here 25,000 people. Although it is rumoured actually there have been efforts to cap the number simply because of the pinch points that have been experienced at the security areas. I have to say we haven't got pictures of the security areas because we were told not to take pictures for security reasons. So that's what it looks like, and that's the outside of our newsroom there. Now let's move on, because we want to talk about investment industry and deforestation. The word is that there will be a big deal tomorrow announced on deforestation to take effect by 2030. Let's pick up and work out what is happening. I'm joined here in the studio by Vicky Taulikorpis, welcome, who is the former UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people. Welcome.
Thank you.
And let's go on Zoom to two of our other guests, to Alfred Brownell, who's a Liberian economist, an environmental activist and lawyer, and from Indonesia by the Dayak indigenous leader, Norman Jiwan. Welcome to you both. I hope you can both hear me. I think you're smiling, which is a good sign that, yes, and waving as well. So thanks very much indeed for joining us. And the issue is investment industry and deforestation. Vicky, first of all, do you think things are moving in the right direction, maybe faster than you expected?
Yes, in the sense that at least for indigenous peoples, there are some efforts to bring in indigenous peoples in the climate change negotiations.
You feel that, do you, very strongly?
Well, not so strongly because, we are here, but we still have a lot of issues that we want to bring to the attention of the state parties. And of course, one of the issues is about investments because they are going to announce billions of dollars to support the climate change mitigation and adaptation processes. But we are very we are quite skeptical in a way because we know that there are big investors or asset managers who are still supporting deforestation.
So their mindset has not changed?
I think so. While they talk about contributing to the climate change solution, you can still see that their investments in pipelines, tar sands, as well as in deforestation are continuing. So I think that's really one area that should be looked into because these investments are not just destroying, indigenous territories, but of course violating their rights, and also the kinds of violence that we see happening in indigenous territories is because of the push for these investments.
So do I summarize your view at the moment as skeptical, cautious?
Skeptical,
right.
and yeah.
Well, let's get a view from elsewhere. Let's go to Norman Jawan. Welcome, Norman, from Indonesia, the Dayak indigenous leader. I'll come to you first. You're 12,000 kilometres away from us here in very chilly, I have to say, Glasgow, which has been smitten by storms and rain. It's very Scottish weather, but it's tough for a lot of people and very unlike Indonesia. What's your feeling? Is there, particularly with the palm oil problem and so many issues in Indonesia, is your feeling that something is moving now on deforestation or not?
Well, thank you very much for this important and critical opportunities to speak out really about stopping financial institutions financing deforestation and whatever. And I have to say, if it is not now, it is already too late, because when we are talking about deforestation in Indonesia, especially because of the productions of massive biodiesel and biofuel production from especially from palm oil, we have lost our tropical rainforest very, very rapidly. For example, now if we are talking about around 16 million hectares, 16 to 17 million hectares of planted oil palm plantation, around 3.28 million hectares are located in the forest areas. That is illegal from legal frameworks in Indonesia. That is really happening in Indonesia. Out of that,
but Norman, can I just come to you and ask you? Do you believe this can be reversible, that it will be reversible, and that if there is an agreement internationally, as we've seen for CFCs and we've seen for other things in past history, recent history, do you think that there can be a significant change? Because Vicky is saying is being very cautious.
It cannot be reversible at the moment, and not soon, I believe, because if the current patterns is continuing, it's not going to be reversible. And I'm not confident to say it can be reversible at the moment, at least. That is what I can predict, because if, for example, our omnibus law is properly implemented, we will be losing our further 665,000 hectares of forest because of this new sweeping law. Undermine what already weak protections of legal frameworks over our natural tropical rainforest, because massive expansions of agribusiness, especially for the productions of biodiesel and biofuel from palm oil, and also tree plantations. Vicky already mentioned that we are not only skeptical because of the development, it's really not in favor of our call for stopping deforestation.
All right, well, Norman, let me go to Alfred Brownell, if I can, to the eastern United States, a Liberian environmental activist and lawyer. Alfred, welcome. What is your reflection listening? We had two very cautious, really quite negative voices here. Is your view the same?
I'm sorry to have to agree with my colleagues. The train has left the station. The train has left the station. There's serious issues, especially in terms of the sort of investment that we see. We have nothing bold and visionary financial leaders to ensure that the assets that they manage and an investment that they make in the area of deforestation, that they can find a way to curtail that. What we see are statements like we want disclosure, but disclosure by itself is not sufficient. We need to ensure that disclosure is aligned with accountability, transparent processes, and to ensure that the commitment of free, prior, informed consent is fully embedded into that process. This is not what we're seeing. So we have to go beyond just the statement by these asset managers, by these investors, that they have the whole commitment to no deforestation. Just saying that is not sufficient. We have to see actions on the ground. When you say you're committed to no deforestation, how do we see that transform into tangible actions on the ground?
Well, let
when
me
you
let
say
me
you are
let,
committed
let me
to the rights of indigenous people, how do we see that translated on the ground?
let me press you, Alfred.
We're not seeing that across the globe.
Let me press you then. If there is to be a deal, and if it is, say, to be announced tomorrow, Tuesday, what impact do you think it'll have on the economic and business interests who've exploited forests for decades? Do they think they can still get away with it, in your view?
Of course, the system is still towards them. We have a business model that caters to them. They drive this system. They own this system. That's why we see the massive amount of deforestation. We see the massive amount of inequality. We see the attack on environmental and land right defenders with impunity. They always have the seat at the table. We are the ones who have to come and continue to beg for a seat and for a voice to be heard. So this is what we have. The decision at Glasgow has to be fundamental in the way that puts indigenous people, that put land and environmental defenders at the seat and ensure that there is tangible, binding commitment. We cannot have the whole process of self-reporting. Over the years, this is where we have come. Asset managers, investors, institutions have had the whole paradigm. We are committed to report. We are committed to disclose. We have to go beyond just that self-reporting process to ensure that there is binding commitment. So we are hoping that Glasgow, at this time, will put into place really binding commitment so that there's accountability for those who have used their trillions to engage in the destructive development that has compromised the rest of indigenous people, has compromised their history, their culture, their tradition, their sacred areas.
Vicky, let me pick up on that. Two important words there that Alfred used: impunity, and the phrase self-reporting. That until those are actually killed, essentially, it will not be a success. Do you agree?
I agree, definitely. You know, we ourselves have experienced these kinds of impunity where no justice comes to the victims and the perpetrators are not brought to justice. So if that's the kind of situation we see, then the change that we want to bring about is not going to be there.
But is a glass filling better than a glass which is not being addressed?
Well, a glass filling is, of course, better. You know, if the glass, the contents of the glass are really good decisions and good and very concrete measures.
All right. Well, let me ask Norman as well. Is the glass filling in the right direction, or do you remain so skeptical that you believe it really cannot make an impact, particularly with that phrase of self-reporting? Well, no one really wants to self-report in a way that incriminates them, and also that word impunity.
That is a very important question, and I have to say we can do, and I can see this the glass being filled in the right direction from the indigenous people's perspective, or practicing since time of immemorial how indigenous peoples are working and exercising their traditions in protecting forests, not from the other side of the people who self-reporting for protecting forests. I believe that is not the way to stop deforestation. If you just want to do self-reporting without really changing or stopping the deforestation, it's nothing. It's nonsense. And impunity, that is a serious problems in that making our planet and our left tropical rainforest is continued to be destroyed by different actors, not only because of the untouchable actors, but also at the same time, massive corruptions linked to forestry sectors is serious problems, not only in my Borneo Islands, but also other big islands in Sumatra, Sulawesi, and Papua. All the process of permit issuing down to production process, environmental approval process linked to bribery and corruption. That's very serious problems.
All right, well, Norman, thank you. I have to stop you at that point. Thank you very much indeed. There's a long delay on the line as well. So Norman, Alfred and Vicky, thank you very much. Vicky here in Glasgow and Alfred on the east coast of the United States. Thank you very much indeed. We don't have the details yet on deforestation. That could come tomorrow, Tuesday. But what about a reflection on the fact that there could be at least some small-scale improvements, some small-scale positives from the deforestation deal, which could be announced tomorrow, which focuses on upsetting the ecological balance and the chances of trees consuming carbon dioxide.
When we are tired, we all need time to recover, to rest and restore. The oldest rainforest on Earth has been here for 180 million years. That's really old. Rainforests work hard to care for the species that call them home, and for the rest of the planet. Rainforests draw carbon out of the atmosphere and share oxygen for us to breathe. Rainforests regulate climate, filter water, and stabilize the soil where they grow. Rainforests are a part of a system that helps hold the world together. And they are in trouble. Although much of the world's rainforests are fragmented and degraded, we have an opportunity to restore what's been lost for all wildkind. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon are reclaiming their territories and restoring them for the benefit of people and wildlife. Local communities in Madagascar are cultivating tree nurseries to plant, protect, and monitor native seedlings. Rainforest restoration programs around the world are slowly rebuilding complex ecosystems from the ground up. Together, we can help rainforests rest and recover. We can rewild our world.
That reflection there from Re.Wild, reflecting the kind of deep concerns, as we heard in the three-way discussion beforehand. What about the way so many countries are looking at what's happening here at COP26 in Glasgow? Let's go to the Jorge Rivera, who is the Energy Minister of Panama, joining us via Zoom from Panama City. Minister, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I can see from your desk. What's your reflection on where this is likely to be going here in COP26 and what Panama particularly wants from it?
Oh, greetings from Panama. We are actually very confident and optimistic about the options here in the COP. We have been doing a great job of getting ready for this. As a team, we are one of the 3 carbon negatives countries in the world right now, and we want to go ahead more than for that. From the energy side, we have a full, comprehensive, and holistic approach in our energy transition agenda that we approved last year.
How brave, Minister, do you reckon you really can be in Panama about the kind of compromises that the public is going to have to make if there is going to be the kind of dramatic agreement here and the kind of things that John Kerry talks about? We've done the 65%, the easy bit. Now we've got to do the 35%, which is going to be incredibly difficult, not least because the public has got to be convinced.
Yes, actually, there's a lot of alternative that we have to get into the approach, not just about how those developed countries are going to contribute and fulfill the commitments to put the resources in order to go ahead with the climate change agenda, but also how do us, the developing countries, are working hard to get ready for the use of these resources and the kind of alternative that we have without these resources. That's the thing that we're doing here in Panama, and we expect, and we're right now doing, is to be some kind of lessons learned on how to develop a transition in a country with doesn't have that kind of money in order to put it into the projects and the programs.
Well, let us understand your dilemmas, and we're here particularly talking about nature and the fact that nature is now being factored or needs to be factored into so many business arrangements, business plans, profit and loss accounts. It's got to be costed. It can't just be taken for granted. You've got 4.5 million people in your country. How are you going to change the way they think? Not in 50 years' time or 15 years' time, but now, very quickly.
Okay, we have already some work that we have been doing. You know, our electricity matrix is around 75% to 80% of renewable right now. We are a country that already is working on that side. We have plans for involvement of the citizens. We have plans for involvement of the communities also in this process. And we have developed economic impact approach of this, of how do we, the numbers can make us go ahead. It's not only good for the environment, it's not only good for the climate change fight again, but also it's good for economy, for the businesses. And this is something that we have, we are in a process of everybody getting to know the options. We have this source of information for authorities, for companies, for citizens, and we expect to create at least 15,000 new jobs by the year 2024 in this energy transition agenda, and the adding to the GDP and the savings in subsidies and energy costs. So we have a comprehensive approach for this.
But let me be very frank with you. Whether you're Panama or the United States or you're China or you're Russia or you're a developing country somewhere in Africa, there's the business of convincing people that this is a very serious planetary existential threat. How much is that now central to your government's policies going forward? You've got to be re-elected, you've got to be popular with the people, but the people are not going to like some of the things you're going to have to introduce as part of the adaptation and mitigation plans.
Yes, that's a fact. The first thing that we have to put is the numbers on the table and the facts on the table. This is the key issue. And we have to go ahead. We have a lot of work to do in this education and empowerment processes. And that's why we're doing. You know, we just don't have the programs, the specific and functions, the regulatory framework, the policies, but also the involvement of the communities in this process, the companies. So this is the way we're doing it. It's very transparent, authentic, and we know that this is our biggest challenge, and it's in the middle of our proposal of public policies right now on the government, and of course we expect to go ahead in the next government. We're not thinking about re-election right now. We are thinking about planting the seeds for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years for our country. So we are really realistic on that side.
All right. Well, Minister, thank you very much indeed. Jorge Rivera, the Energy Minister of Panama. Thanks for joining us live from Panama City. Let's move now to Kevin Conrad, who's Special Envoy for Climate Change for Papua New Guinea, rather different to Panama City and Panama, and the Executive Director for the Coalition for Rainforest Nations. Let me talk to you specifically as Executive Director of the Coalition for Rainforest Nations. And you heard, I think, probably the discussion which we were having with three involved in deforestation and the essentially the raping of the rainforest. What's your reflection on the potential for some kind of deal tomorrow, and whether it's deliverable by 2030, and whether those who are involved in rainforest exploitation will even respect it?
Well, the fundamental principle is simply this, that once forests are valued more alive than dead, we can actually reverse global deforestation.
Are we on that point?
We're not nearly there. So the problem I have with what's to be announced tomorrow is that there hasn't been a costing. So we make a political statement. Let us all together reverse global deforestation, but nobody knows how much it will cost.
So it's a vague sort of declaration of principle, is it?
Well, there'll be a lot of window dressing. There'll be a vague declaration of some key principles. There's some great announcements. And let me say, anytime we focus on nature and its role in climate, it's a good thing. But if we build false expectations, if we just have an announcement and there's no there, right? And that's what we need. If we're going to roll back global deforestation in the next 10 years, we have to get resources ready and deploy them quickly and urgently, or we will fail.
One of the things that has always bedeviled discussion, not just of rainforests, but so much in the climate emergency, has been data. Do you think there's now adequate data which proves beyond all doubt what is needed, how it can be done?
Well, whether we like it or not, about every 17 days a satellite is taking a picture of all of us. So we can track almost in real time 2-3 meter square pixels what's going on in the rainforest. So we have available data today, so we can prove this without a shadow of a doubt when a country is reversing its deforestation and when it's expanding its carbon stocks. The problem is not data. The problem is resource. Countries have already done it. Under the RED mechanism here, about 13 countries have already reduced 9 gigatons of emissions from slowing rates of deforestation, but they've only received payment for about 4% of that. So right now, developing countries are doing their part on their own backs.
We heard in that discussion there impunity and self-reporting essentially being very damaging from any chance of full transparency and accountability. Can that be somehow systematized in a way which means it doesn't happen in the future?
It's already systematized. Under the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC already hires independent reviewers to review the satellite data and verify what's happened. So the RED Plus mechanism already does that. It's just that most of the world doesn't understand how it works yet.
Who does?
Those involved in this agreement, and we need to do a better education of explaining what has already been achieved and accomplished under the Paris Agreement.
Are the exploiters also very good? They understand it. They found their ways around it.
It's hard to hide a felled tree from satellite images, right? Or even locally. But again, the problem is, as long as we can put resources valuing the ecosystem services of forests, then we can win. If all we're trying to do is run around policing, we will fail.
Let me put something else to you. One of the things that more than several large corporates have said is we're not going to buy in future from something which has been produced unsustainably and has not reflected and respected legislation. I don't need to name the companies, but you know what I'm talking about. They're under pressure from shareholders. They're also saying it's a condition of you being a supplier to us that you will produce, say, timber in a way which means you are totally accountable, you are totally transparent, and therefore we know exactly what you're doing. Is that having any effect?
I think it's very helpful symbolically, but let's keep in mind about 70% of the trade of agriculture and wood is amongst developing countries, and only about 25% of that ends up in the rich countries. So while it's important that they signal that, it's really important that developing countries are also part of that process.
And are they at the moment? Is it moving in that direction? Let me put it that way.
Well, there's different ways to skin the cat. So do you trace from the supply side, or do you get right at the heart of the issue on the ground in developing countries and make interventions on the ground? And we're advocating doing both. So let's make those interventions on the ground, and let's trace whatever leaves that area.
Kevin Conrad from Papua New Guinea and also from the Rainforest Coalition. Thank you very much indeed for joining
Appreciate
us
it. Thank you.
Here in Glasgow. At least it's warm in here,
All
unlike
right.
outside at the moment. Stay
All
where
right.
you are for a moment,
All right. Thank
because
you.
I'm just going to introduce, so we're going to keep going on the business of costing and mindsets and the kind of thing that Kevin and many of our guests have been talking about in the last 40 minutes, because President Macron of France has just told fellow leaders that commercial calculations by businesses must now factor in nature. That means everyone and everywhere. To test if that will happen, I spoke with Sabah Hossain Chowdhury. He leads Bangladesh's Parliamentary Committee on the Environment, Forests and Climate Change. He wants the destruction of an ecosystem to be treated as a crime. He supports the idea of national parliaments considering legislation for ecocide. That includes Bangladesh. Will that radical option really help drive progress here in Glasgow?
You know, when you use the term significant, it's always relative. Significant has to be what science demands. So there might be progress, you know, there might be announcement, there might be pledges, but at the end of the day, what counts is whether what we are deciding is what science is screaming at us to do. And my concern is that we are not doing enough. There will be progress, of course. In every COP there's progress, but you're not looking at incremental progress. You're looking at something which is far more fundamental. Something which is actually going to be a breakthrough rather than small incremental changes, because that is what the science is saying.
You're talking with us at the Nature Newsroom, the emphasis being on nature. Absolutely. How much do you think now that the world, literally in the last few months, has understood that nature is a cost that can't be just taken for granted?
It's not just a cost, it's also an asset. You know, I mean, if you take the case of Bangladesh, you have all heard about the Sundarbans, which is one of the largest mangrove forests in the world. And the way it has protected the coastal areas of Bangladesh, every year we have cyclones or major natural events. And that has acted really as a barrier, which has saved lives, it has saved livelihoods. So we understand nature, and for us, nature-based solutions are absolutely fundamental.
But I'm talking also about the corporate world.
Yes.
Those who are essentially raping the land, raping resources, and not considering it as a cost, thinking of it as their right to do so.
That is a mindset that needs to change. I think, you know, we are seeing some indications, but it hasn't gone to the point where I would feel comfortable. In fact, one of the things that we are looking at the committee is a law on ecocide, which is, you know, about mass destruction, mass and willful destruction of nature.
But what kind of dialogues do you have with the corporate sector, whether the big corporates or the many, many, many smaller corporates?
We try to instill in them the fact that nature has a value.
Do they understand it?
I think they would understand it better if we actually had nature-based accounting. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to establish a base for a natural capital. You know, obviously we can't have it in the GDP, but we are looking at it in terms of satellite accounts. What you cannot measure, you don't value, or people outside don't value. So for us, one is advocacy, one is talking to them, one is having a dialogue, but we also need to put on the ground certain fundamentals, a framework. And I think that's why valuation of nature, the services that we get from the ecosystem are so very important. So I think it has to be a gradual process.
As you say, you are dealing with a mindset. You're dealing with corporates who've been created not considering the value but also the cost and the price to nature. Do you think you can move the mindset at the speed that is necessary given the enormity of the massive challenge that we have at the moment?
That's obviously a big question, but
well,
I don't think
what's your answer?
I don't think we have the luxury of choice. We have to do it. You
Do
know,
they understand it, the corporates?
They have to understand it. And I think that's where we have a role to play. That's why we are looking at legislative frameworks. We are looking at policies. You know, how can we protect nature? Because at the end of the day, that's our biggest asset. So how do we protect that asset and how do we move forward?
But many corporates think it's their right to exploit nature at no cost to anyone else.
Is that right? Because maybe we don't have the legislation and the policies in place. But I think once we do that, once we make it very clear, for instance, we now have a provision in the Constitution of Bangladesh which talks about protection of nature, of ecosystem services, of biodiversity, which we didn't have before. And that is under fundamental principles of state policy. So, we are getting there. I think we need to move fast, as you say, because we can't afford small changes. We need big breakthroughs. We need big shifts in mindset. And that's the challenge. That's what we have to work on, of course.
But how easy is it going to be to get these regulations through Parliament? Is there a significant obstruction and opposition to them?
I think within the Parliament we are okay. Bangladesh, remember, is the only country in the world which has actually taken a resolution on a planetary emergency. We didn't just talk about climate. So their nature, a nature being not at war with nature, taking nature to be an integral part of us. Even when we define or try to describe biodiversity, biodiversity is in trees and animals that live in the jungle. We are a part of that diversity. So when we talk about nature, nature is integral to us. It's a part of our culture, it's a part of our legacy, and it's part of what we will become in the future.
But let me put it to you, Mr. Chowdhury, you can declare an emergency and it can feel and sound good and make good headlines, but there are still many who can drag their feet and make it more difficult despite the emergency.
No, I think the declaration of the emergency is to show the intent, is to highlight the issue, is to show that there is political consensus, and once you've got enough hooks on the board, then you can bring in other things. So for us it was strategic, having that emergency, talking about a low carbon development pathway for Bangladesh, and it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. I think it was necessary. Of course it's not sufficient, but we needed to have a start, and I think the emergency is what we want to build on as we move forward.
Final thought, if I may. What about corporates and those who make money, good money, out of good business, whether domestically or externally? How much are they prepared, do you believe, to do this on their own, as opposed to waiting for you in Parliament to pass a law?
I would like to think they would do it on their own because of enlightened self-interest. Because, if you're looking at it from a long-term point of view, it may make good returns for you in the short term, but in the long term, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. But I don't think that will happen.
So they reckon that they're going to put a value on nature at last?
Well, we'll see how we go.
Sabah Hassan Chowdhury there from Bangladesh, the chair of the Committee on Environment, Forest and Climate Change, talking about the new word there, ecocide, not just genocide, ecocide. How much will that underpin much of our discussion here in the Nature Newsroom over the coming days, the coming couple of weeks? The idea that something else is emerging, not just genocide, but ecocide as well. Now, what's it like running a COP? Well, at short notice, Spain took over the mantle a couple of years ago. It had to because of unrest in Santiago in Chile. And Carolina Schmidt was the last president of the COP, COP25, which took place in Madrid, Spain. I was there. What are her expectations for COP26?
We need in COP26 to have three main solutions for that. One has to be to go for ambition, to really fill the gap that we have an ambition. Secondly, we need cash, finance, to support the climate action at the level that we need. And third, we need real and clear rules to implement the Paris Agreement. In those three main issues, the ocean is clearly connected. So we need, to increase ambition and the climate action in the oceans. We need finance to really be able to implement the ocean protection, and we need clear rules, and that's, is one of our main goals, is to agree on the protection on 30% of all the oceans in our planet to really save the ocean for the climate action. There's no green in the world if we don't have any blue. 2/3 of the planet are covered by the oceans, and the oceans are the main regulator on climate. We cannot continue having the climate agenda and the ocean agenda as if they were separate ones. We have only one planet. We have to integrate this agenda. One of the main achievements of COP25 was being able to integrate those agendas in one. So we make the ocean one of the pillars of the climate action.
Carolina Schmidt there, no longer in charge, but she handed over the baton to Alok Sharma yesterday, the British president for the next year. And what a job he's got. She remembers well what it was like in Madrid. Well, as part of our Nature Newsroom, we're giving indigenous people a voice, a very important voice, because they tend to be forgotten about or certainly marginalized and sidelined. We've already heard from Norman from the Dayak community in Indonesia. Let's go back to Indonesia, where indigenous people do play a critical role in working to conserve the environment, as we were hearing from Norman. Customary lands are their main source of livelihood, but these customary lands are not always recognized by the authorities.
Indonesia terdiri dari bermacam-macam suku dan budaya yang tersebar di ribuan pulau. Di alam Indonesia, terdapat masyarakat adat yang hidup dan menjaga wilayah adat. Meski kini modernisasi telah menjadi bagian dari masyarakat urban, masyarakat adat tetap setia dengan nilai-nilai yang mereka anut. Masyarakat adat berperan penting dalam menjaga kelestarian lingkungan di wilayah adat. Mulai dari memanfaatkan wilayah adatnya, seperti hasil hutan, hingga memelihara hutan adat, semuanya dilakukan dengan menghormati nilai-nilai luhur. Wilayah adat dapat membantu menopang ekonomi masyarakat karena hasil hutan merupakan sumber kehidupan, sumber pangan, sumber tanaman obat, dan lainnya. Hutan adat yang terjaga dengan baik membuat kita, masyarakat urban, juga bisa merasakan manfaatnya. Hutan melahirkan oksigen atau udara bersih yang penting bagi semua manusia. Hutan juga menghasilkan keragaman kehidupan flora dan fauna. Walaupun wilayah adat memiliki peran penting dalam keseimbangan alam dan ekonomi masyarakat, keberadaan wilayah adat belum mendapatkan perlindungan hukum. Padahal, dengan adanya perlindungan hukum, masyarakat adat dapat mempertahankan kawasan yang dianggap sebagai wilayah adat dari masyarakat adat. Masyarakat adat adalah bagian dari bangsa Indonesia. Namun, perjuangan mereka dalam menjaga wilayah adat tidak selalu mudah. Kita bisa membantu masyarakat adat dengan memulai langkah kecil, seperti mendukung masyarakat adat mendapatkan perlindungan hukum. Ikuti terus informasi tentang perkembangan perjuangan masyarakat adat dalam mendapatkan perlindungan hukum di situs aman.org.id.
Understanding the implications of deforestation, and particularly for the indigenous community there in Indonesia. So let's get an overall understanding of how far nature is moving. Nature is at the heart of these news operations, this newsroom, this news studio. I'm joined by Bruno Obele, who's Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, as Bruno, you're normally known. I want to understand, because you've talked about humanity at a tipping point, and you had a big conference which actually had far more energy, probably, than anyone imagined in Marseille, literally 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about how much nature has gripped imagination?
You know, nature, all we eat is nature. All we breathe is done by nature. All we drink is prepared by nature. Nature is our platform. We are alive because nature supports us. And nature could also support us in tackling the climate challenge. So this is something that the more people live near by nature, the more realize it. Farmers knows that nature is about everything. Indigenous people knows because they live with nature. We have lost this sense of relation with nature. Maybe COVID have helped us to remember about the importance.
But let me put this to you, though. You can say that. You've been in the job now for 18 months. You were in the Swiss government beforehand. When you look back to where you were 18 months ago, and then you look at the Dasgupta report of last February, which said nature has to be respected as a legitimate externality of every business operation and every business calculation. That wasn't on the agenda a year ago.
Dasgupta says even more than that. Dasgupta is challenging the concept.
It's a long report.
Yeah. It's challenging the concept of sustainability. It has a three-pillar system with social, economic, and environment. Dasgupta says very simply what it is. We are living on a platform, and this platform is nature. All we do is related to nature. And this is a fundamental truth that we have to keep in mind when we plan our activities. We are in the last decades, we have taken from nature, we have used nature to do everything we need to do. Look here around. The table is wood, is nature. The book is paper, it is nature. Your clothes, my clothes, everything is coming from nature. We have taken and taken and taken. And now nature is sending signals that it doesn't can anymore. And now we have to stop taking so much and reinvesting, giving back to nature.
But let me put it to you, you use the word plan. I'd like to add the word costing, because in other words, there's got to be a monetary value. It can't be assumed to be a green and verdant country, land, which you can then take apart with bulldozers and everything else. You know what I'm talking about. In other words, how much do you reckon the business is prepared now to cost nature?
I don't think it is yet in the mind of everyone.
Is it moving in that direction?
But it is moving in that direction. Business has learned a lot from the climate debates, and this is simply the next wave of elements that have to be incorporated in the business calculation. Remember, 40%, even more than 40% of the global GDP is linked to nature. If we lose nature, we lose GDP, we lose growth, we lose jobs. And transforming our economies in a way that respect nature, this needs new products, new services, new infrastructure. At speed. And all of this, what it is a huge opportunity for the economy. It is the Marshall Plan, 10 times bigger than the Marshall Plan. It is about investing the money to transform our socio-economic system.
But I'm reading here, Bruno, from your Marseille Manifesto, paragraph 3, right at the top. Our window of opportunity to respond to these interlinked emergencies and share planetary resources equitably is narrowing quickly. Now, that's very diplomatic language for saying we're in a race. And that's what Boris Johnson said right at the beginning today. He said we're in a race against time. Do you think your members, and I gather it was a very vigorous conference in Marseille, almost surprisingly vigorous, that there's a real grip which is overtaking the business sector, the political sector, to understand the core of what the IUCN stands for, which is making sure nature survives?
I don't want to appear a naive believer that everything is happening. It is difficult. It is a challenge. For an entrepreneur to spend money in a specific direction, it needs to have a certain amount of guarantees that the regulations are following, that the governments are creating level playing fields, that the customer understands the message. On the other side, the governments have to have a majority to push new regulation through, and the customer, to make the right choices, need an income that is high enough and needs to have opportunity to choose. So it is all the system that have to evolve in that direction. We have to make, and this is the reason because we're speaking about a transformational change, and these have to go quickly, and this is only possible in a broad alliance between political world, economic world, and societal world.
But you make a point here, respecting and harnessing the perspectives and agency of all citizens. Yeah. And what is coming through loud and clear is that the next generation in particular is becoming very impatient, very anxious. And Boris Johnson said here today, on behalf of the leaders, we're at 1 minute to midnight, which is a reference to the nuclear war, because we were 1 minute to midnight in the nuclear war. Is that the way it feels in your organization? Yeah. Is that something you're mobilizing for?
This is for sure. In ICN, we are aware about the fact that we don't have so much time, that we don't have time to waste. Maybe to say 1 minute to midnight is even very optimistic. It is something that we were telling when I was a young person. I was also very impatient and was also very anxious about the future, and we were telling it is 5 minutes before midnight. We have lost a lot of time. We have moved partially in the wrong direction, and this obliges us now to turn very quickly in the right direction. The urgency is here, and I think it is also slowly in the business world and in the political world.
So let me, final question, let me ask you, what's your vision then of how this can be achieved? Because the United Nations Environment Agency made very clear that we're lucky if we've got 8 years. Lucky if we've got 8 years. Frans Timmermans, one of the vice presidents of the European Union, says we've really only got 2 years. In other words, there's an emergency, there's an urgency to the emergency. And how, therefore, can you engage on this?
Taking the right decision, in putting the political signal right, in making investment in the right direction, in using the right information when we are consuming. All of us, they are asked now to take the right decision in the right direction, at the same moment. I don't know if we will succeed, but what I know it is that we have to succeed.
You've got to try.
We have to succeed because it is our life that it is at stake. If we want our children and our grandchildren to live in a world that it is better than today's world, or at least as good as it is now, then we have to make now the right decisions.
Well, thank you very much, Bruno Eberle, who's the Director General of the IUCN. Welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Stay there for one moment, because while you were talking, I was told that Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, a country of 1.4 billion people, has committed India to go net zero by 2070. That is 1 year later than China and also 1 year later than Saudi Arabia, 10 years, I should say. 10 years later than Saudi Arabia and China. Saudi Arabia made its announcement this time last week. So things are moving. Net zero is being committed to, but there's still that very, very long horizon being pursued by some countries, which, in the view of many scientists, 92 who've written today to the Nature magazine, saying that this has got to happen so much quicker than the science is suggesting, because otherwise really will be catastrophic. So to you all, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be doing this every day for the next 2 weeks until the closure of the COP26. So please do join us at this time every day. Bye-bye.
Are you using Liberty Mutual's coverage customizer tool? So you only pay for what you need. Sorry? Leave him, you're an animal!